Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello and welcome to Syosset Public Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am very happy to have author Linda Crotta Brennan on today's podcast to discuss her debut novel, The Selkie's Daughter. And I thought that this was a really imaginative book, and it dealt with a lot of Celtic mythology and Selkies, which was really cool. So thank you so much for being on the show today with us, Linda.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so we'll delve into this great novel that you wrote. So this is your debut novel. How did you get into writing?
Well, I've been writing for a long time. So I have 2 picture books and over 24 nonfiction books for kids out there. But all the while I was on the side writing fiction. So I've been doing that for a long time. And this novel came to be because one of my habits is to journal every morning. And I was journaling one day, and this girl strode onto the page, and she stood on a cliff, and she hurled these prayers over the raging sea. And it was just bring him home, bring him home, bring him home. And I had to discover who she was and who he was and what had happened to him. And to get to know anybody, you really have to spend time with them. So I spent some time with this girl, and I discovered her name was Brigit, and that she lived in the misty, mysterious coast of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, and that, like many men there, her father was a fisherman, and he was lost at sea. And based on the Celtic folklore that's really deep into that area, I decided her mother must be a selkie, and that must be something she's desperate to hide. There you have it.
Yeah, it was so cool because I thought that this was a great fantasy read. I love Brigit's character development, and she's faced with a lot of situational type things. Being a selkie is being like, so she's part human through her mother, and then her mother has the selkie heritage, so that's meaning like she wears the seal skin, and then she's able to go back into the water. But there's all kinds of things we learn about that there's, it's not exactly like she could just easily go back and forth seamlessly between the land and the sea. There's a lot of tough, difficult decisions she has to make. And she also deals with a lot of bullying, which I feel like kids, can identify with, because a lot of kids, deal with bullying, and that, it's not nice that happens. And she's called a lot of bad names and different things by the people in her town. So she's dealing with like an identity crisis too. I thought that was interesting. You like how you incorporated the fantasy with realistic elements too with that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I tried to do that. It's interesting because it took me actually 7 years to write this book, so it's been evolving over time. But I wrote part of it during COVID and watching what the world was going through then, and I'm sure that influenced the plot of the book. As a writer, you're always pulling from the real world to bring into your writing and what's going on in your novel. So.
It was very interesting from an historical fiction perspective too, because she's in 19th century Nova Scotia. So that was really cool to see, like, I always found that to be a beautiful area, and like all the fishing and everything that went on at that time. But there was also a lot of sickness and disease. So I know that we dealt with that recently, and that was something that hit home because that's something, we were dealing with during the pandemic, and people were getting sick. So it was interesting to see a different time period, how we connect through time, to these different types of things, and to see, like how things are different sometimes things are similar, in different times. And she has a little brother to this main character, Brigit too. And so he goes on, it's like that family development too of the arc with the little brother, and then the mother being selkie, and then the father being human, and then like the whole dynamic of that too. I thought that you did that very well. Because I feel like Bridget's very protective of her little brother, and I think that, she tries to, steer him in the right direction, but it's very difficult, like taking care of your sibling. And I think a lot of kids can identify with that, that are an older sibling, taking
Right.
care of their sibling. And she has some really good friends too. Like I like the character of Alice, is it pronounced? Yeah, so.
Yeah, Alice is interesting because in the beginning of the book, she's portrayed as not so nice, but there's a development with
Yes.
that relationship changes as
And that's
the book.
realistic. Yeah, to like how
Right.
friendships are, because they evolve. Sometimes you don't always connect with someone in the beginning, but then through time.
Yeah, so Margaret, I think Margaret's always admired Bridget, but Margaret's mother is kind of against the whole Selkie. Yeah. So that's kind of stained their relationship and strained it. And then finally through the book, out, Bridget realizes that maybe Margaret's not so bad.
Yeah. Mark. Yeah, because
So,
she has that difficult, yeah, she definitely like over the course of, the book Bridget with Alice, her mother forms like a much stronger bond. And I feel like
right.
that's, it could be true to life. Like she has some, differences of opinions with her, and her mom, but then like she wants to like get in tune more with her heritage too, and find out about like what it means to be a Selkie. And I remember one of the opening passages, like Bridget's trying to get rid of like the webbing on her hands. And I thought that that was really well, like written, like how you wrote that part in, because she's like, I feel like in the beginning of the story fighting, like
Right.
her past heritage, like her current, her heritage of being a Selkie and trying to assimilate, with the human world. But then there's conflicts that arise later on that,
Right.
she has to like, become like back into that world again. And like something, I won't spoil, like something happens where she has to journey to a land to meet her family and some other Selkies, and that becomes like a very big plot point in the book. And it's cool to see that world too, because through mythology, like we know about Selkies, but you expanded on it, which was really cool. And I love your in each of the chapters, you start with like a poetic passage, which I thought was really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit like about that, like why you decided to do that?
Well, a lot of the book was generated by my love of Celtic music and Celtic folklore. So that was kind of a starting point. And I think that's so much a part of Bridget's world, and she really views the world through that lens. So I thought that having a little passage from the folklore at the beginning of every chapter would kind of set the stage. And I think tried it out a little bit, and my editor really loved it and encouraged me to go ahead and do that. So the first chapter, that passage, that little verse, is similar to the first verse of an ancient ballad called The Great Selkie. But the other verses I wrote based on what I learned from folklore. And so I tried to use music as my way of getting into those verses, so that I was trying to capture that beat and cadence of what a song would be like.
Yeah, it was really beautiful because I read like as I was reading through those beginning of the chapters, like there was a whole side, folklore, that was being brought in, like the actual folklore story, which was cool in your like continuation, of using elements of the folklore. I thought that that was a really interesting, like, conglomeration of the two elements together. And I want to read more about Finn McCool too, like, and the whole folklore of that. Like you said, it took you 7 years to write this book. How did you start, like, researching? Did you do a lot of research about the folklore?
Yes, so as I mentioned, I've got like 24 nonfiction books for kids out there, and so I'm really addicted to research. I always researched everything that I possibly could about the book. So what through the writing time, anytime I saw anything about Celtic literature, Celtic folklore, Celtic music, Celtic movies, I was always looking further and further into what were all the traditions. And I apparently didn't exhaust that because I've recently been doing some book signings and things like that. And I've had a couple of people come up to me and tell me, oh, I'm descended from Selkies. And
Very cool. Yeah.
one woman said, yeah, I have Selkies on both sides of my family because
Wow.
I come from this particular place and I have dark hair. And I was like, I had never heard
Yeah,
anything.
that's so cool. I was actually, yeah, I was thinking of that. Like, are there people, like, how did this, I know it's hard, you say ancient times, but what specific area are, like, people claiming, like, this whole Selkie
Um,
came
I
from?
can't remember the name of the place that they said they were from, but there was two different people that I encountered this past weekend who claimed that they were Selkies, descended from Selkies.
Yeah.
So I, I wish I remembered what region they said, but they claimed there was a specific town one of them was mentioning, but Celtic lore and lore about the Selkies kind of circles the North Sea. So it's not just the Scottish and Irish legends. It's also Nordic legends from, Scandinavia and Norway and places like that also have legends about Selkies. So it's interesting that that whole region should have that lore as part
It
of
is
it.
interesting. And I wonder how, like, the seals became, like, incorporated as, like, because I know, like, the mermaid legend and folklore is different. It's like
Right,
different, would break off, and that's different areas of the where they have the mermaid legends, but Selkies are very different. That the person, like, has a seal tail, and I wonder how that
right,
came about. It's very interesting how they decided to go with, seals.
right.
Yeah. But underwater, I guess seals could look like almost like a person if you're thinking about it. If someone doesn't look closely enough and they're like, oh, it could be like, could it be, half a person, half a seal, like how these
Right.
legends came about. It's very interesting. But that's so interesting that people claim, like, and cool that, they have Selkie heritage, because it's tying them back to the area, which is really cool. Like,
Right, right.
there were some parts of this. I know there's a part in the story, where you met, like, you talked about, like, how you got the inspiration for, you saw this young woman in front of the cliff, and I feel like the main character finds herself, like, on a cliff at one point in the story, and she's getting bullied by the townspeople, and it almost
Right,
made me think of the Salem witch trials a little bit, and how women were, like, accused of being witches and witchcraft, like, just a tiny bit. And I wonder if there were ever people that were, like, persecuted for being Selkie, if that actually happened in that time, in, like,
I don't know that I uncovered any incidents like that. When I wrote that scene, which came actually later in the
yeah,
book's evolution, that was kind of at the height of COVID, and I was
okay.
seeing bullying in the real world, and I think that's how that seeped into the story from what was going on there. I don't know that people were persecuted for being Selkies, but I know that there's a human tendency to always persecute the other.
Yes. And if any way is someone, is a little bit different than what, they're, sometimes what they're used to, something a little bit different than,
Right.
your understanding, and you just don't, not taking the time to get to know, especially the main character in the story, Brigit, just making assumptions. They don't know about her whole family history and what it means to be a Selkie. So I definitely think, yeah, that was definitely a realistic element, like a lot of that different bullying she faces and misunderstanding through people. And because she's still trying to find out through the book, like about her heritage. And then there is a place called Syosset. Please tell me if I'm not pronouncing that
It-
correctly.
It's called Sulskeri.
Syosset, yes.
Scary is actually a word for a rocky outcrop. So, but that's part of the song of the great Selkie. He's from Sulskeri. So that's, yeah, and that's a ballad that was collected like well over 100 years ago. So it's
Wow. Yeah, because there's a lot of like even the Selkie name itself, because I was trying to do my own research. Is that the Scottish word for seal?
yeah, so yeah, it's based on that, right? So
Mhm.
it's yeah, it comes from that.
It comes from that. Yeah, like all the different names of the places. So like the Salisbury, that's the fabled land of the Selkies that Brigit learns about in the story. And that's in the northern part, like the folklore behind that would be the northern part of Scotland is where that is claimed to be.
So because I set the story in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, I
Mhm.
concentrated on the Scottish legends about
Yes,
Selkies.
yes,
Because there's a very rich tradition of well, Scottish immigrants there
yes,
and Scottish, but there's Selkie legends all over that area. So the Irish also have the same kind of legends about Selkies and about Salisbury. But I think the song "The Great Selkie" was collected from Scotland. I'm pretty sure that's where it was collected from.
yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and yeah, it's just like learning about like Nova Scotia in that time period and like people were on such like it was difficult times and different things and they didn't have like the medicines that we have today.
Right.
Like people got sick or they got injured and there was a lot of death around too and it was just like how it's a part of life for us too, but like it was like so much more that they couldn't help people if they got sick as well
Right.
as we can now in that time. And I almost wonder like these legends like of people going to the sea was a way of like thinking that there's like another life too out there besides like the life on land and it's
Oh,
interesting to yeah.
so when I was doing research, there were Scottish tales that were collected about how like the Selkie legend almost became a way to deal with grief. So they they were talking, this man who had collected these legends felt like it was easier to think that your loved one had been taken by the Selkies than to think
Right, yeah.
that were dead, that they had been lost at sea.
Yeah, it almost reminded me almost of like because she does journey to the land of finding more Selkies later on without spoiling too much. But it reminded me almost of like almost in like some of the Greek myths when they journey to like the land of the people, like something happens or one of the characters goes missing and they journey to the land of the dead, to find
Right,
they're kind of like in between the land of the dead and the living and they have to confront this
right,
figure. That reminded me of that too. I guess there's like all these different, folk tales and mythologies have, these combining elements in common. So that's what made me think of that because there isn't closure. Like when someone
right.
lost at sea or lost someplace. So that was a way of, like you said, people coping with like grief.
Right, right, yeah. So although the Salisbury that I developed in the book is not full of people who seem dead,
No,
they're very much alive.
very much alive, yeah. But it's like a whole nother world. Like
Right,
that just made me think of that. Yeah, just that element. Yeah, it's very much a live world and like people have their own world in dancing and like
right,
yeah, it's very
yeah.
cool. Like I love all like the passages you speak about like the cave structures and
Oh,
like
I have a lot of fun writing that.
yeah, how yeah, because I was reading that section, it's very descriptive, like how we see like how the Selkies live. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like what how you got like the inspiration to like write all that like imagery?
So that wasn't always in there. So that's one of the wonderful things about working with an editor. So my editor said, what the kids are going to really love about your story is the magic. So you need to put a
Yeah.
little more magic in there. And so we talked about how to do that. And so when Brigit goes to Salisbury, she encouraged me to kind of dive into it and describe what life was back like and how the different Celtic she encounters. And so that was partly at the prodding of my editor that I got to do that. But boy, I want to put pet octopus now, it was lots of fun to do that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And she gets to meet all those different characters when she's in School Scurry too. And that's cool. And I think she even gets confused with one of like a cousin that lives in School Scurry. Like she still has like a lot of cousins there. And
Right.
it's interesting, she has like this heritage that's like very different than her world on land, where I feel like it's very much more alive. Like you can almost say like the world on land has more grief and like there's more of this death that's imminent, but these people living in Salisbury, like it's almost like the heavenly, you know,
Yeah.
place out there.
It's definitely a vibrant place,
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
a colorful place. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Very much cool. Yeah. And yeah, the colors and all the different things that you talked about. I really like that a lot. Yeah. And that was like near like a climatic part of the book, and she discovers all of that. So that was really cool. Because we had been reading one lens for a while and it was nice to see that other world
All right.
book.
Yeah.
Like what was your favorite character that you wrote for this book?
So it's hard to pick one, but Peter, I have a tender spot for Peter because in many ways, Peter's the character that's most like me. Because I love science, and whenever I encounter a plant or an animal, I like to discover what its name is. And so I'm an avid birder, so I like to do all that. And I have a dog, and Peter has a dog. And so I loved Peter. At one point, my writing group, my critique group said to me, you really can't make Peter that perfect. Yeah. Not quite so perfect. So one of the things I did is, I love fish and I hate eggs. Well, Peter loves eggs and hates fish, so I did that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that Peter is a little bit dense. He never quite gets who Bridget is for quite some time
Yeah.
and how important legend is for her. So I tried to make him a little less perfect, but he
Yeah.
was fun.
Yeah.
The other thing was writing Tolly's character, this dog, because a lot of bad things happened in the book, and I wanted a way to bring some happiness into Bridget's life.
Yeah.
And so I had a golden retriever who was the love of my
Oh,
life, and so I brought the girl Tolly into the book. So Tolly is a Nova Scotian duck retriever, which is like, it looks just like a golden retriever, except it's smaller and much more hyper and has this high-pitched bark. But so that was a fun character to write. And the Great Selkie was interesting too, because when I started the book, the Great Selkie was just a bad guy. But then as I kept writing, I realized that he wasn't really a bad guy at all. He was just trying to protect those he cared about.
Yes.
So that was interesting. But of course, Brigit was fun to write too.
Yeah.
I liked her transformation from being very timid and afraid to show who she is to, really stepping out there, owning herself and, being able to protect others. And she's, so she really changed and grew the most during the book. Obviously she's the main character, but I had the most fun writing her as a Selkie. So that was what I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, that was so interesting. Like, I really like that element too. I think Brigit is my favorite character. Like, I love all the characters in the story, like specifically, but I think a lot of the kids reading the story will like definitely identify with Brigit a lot because I think she does have this transformation and she grows so much, like as a person and a Selkie, like a person on land, and then the Selkie. And it was so cool how you wrote about, I was wondering how that worked about the seal skin and like what are the putting on the seal skin and becoming the Selkie and like even how they swim. And it was really cool. And like that bond she develops with her mom too. I think like her mom and her are my favorite characters that you wrote in the story, but I liked all the characters. I thought definitely Peter and yeah, it was definitely nice to have like the other side, like other, side characters in the story too really helped. And I think it definitely like gave some levity to some of the dark things were happening. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rules concerning the sealskin and going back and forth between being human
Right.
and being seal are actually mostly accurate to the legends.
Oh, that's
So
cool. Yeah.
so those mostly came from the real legends. I think I took license in one little piece of that, but most of that actually was based on what tradition tells us. And then I did a lot of research into seals. And so some of that research, scientific research about what seals, how they behave and how they sense, and they have a sense beyond our own, that their whiskers tell them so much about the currents and the water.
Oh, that's
And
very interesting.
so that was really, so I incorporated science and folklore into, which
Yeah,
was a
that's
fun
really
thing
cool.
to do.
Yeah, I was wondering because it seems so precise. I'm like, is this part of the folklore? Is it somewhat adapted? I knew it, was like all an adaptation a little bit and, your own interpretation, but that was really cool. And like seeing like how they move underwater, that's very much akin to like what, some of the seals would do, which makes sense. And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see more of like the Selkie world and like maybe another story. Would you consider writing like a companion book to this?
So I've been batting around ideas with my editor, and she would like me to go kind of sideways with this. So she doesn't want to see a sequel or
Right.
anything quite like that, but she does want to see a companion book. And one of the things we were discussing was going to another country. And I just came home from Italy, so maybe there'll be a book
Oh, nice.
about based on Italian folklore.
That would be so cool. I'd be really into that. Because I have Italian heritage, so that'd be really cool to hear some of the folklore,
Yeah,
in Italy. I think a lot of people would find interest from that
yeah. So
too.
we'll see. Yeah, so because I'm a quarter, we believe, Irish because my grandmother was an orphan. We're not sure, but I'm also 3/4 Italian. So
Oh, cool.
we'll
Yeah.
go. we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Like, yeah, I really love how because I feel like I haven't seen this a lot, and that's why I was drawn to this book, how you incorporate the folklore into a fantasy story. I don't see that as much, and I would consider this like middle grade. And I
Yes.
feel like I haven't, and it's very accessible. It was not a book that's like sometimes kids get intimidated if a book is like 400 plus pages. Like you feel like that's the
Right.
kind of book you can read about fantasy and mythology and like have it be good. But I feel like you pack so much into this where it doesn't feel like you don't you don't know about the characters. Like you really well developed. The characters all go throughout a journey and you learn a lot about folklore and the history of the different times. So I feel like kids definitely like really be drawn to this a lot. So definitely recommend this because I feel like this will appeal to a lot of the kids that come to our library. They really enjoy reading fantasy. We have a lot of fantasy fans out there at our library and definitely like mythology and folklore too. So this will definitely it's do well in our collection and can't wait to recommend it.
Well, that will be great. Yeah, it's interesting because at this stage, I've heard a lot of adult reactions to the book,
Yes.
but I'm waiting for the kids to react. I want to
Yeah.
hear what the kids say.
Our copy is
I've heard about are from my grandchildren, so they liked it.
oh, they like oh great. What was their favorite part?
My eldest grandchild said that the ability to really live in that world, to really get immersed in that world. So I guess, that it was so vivid. So I guess that's great. My other two grandchildren just said things like, "Oh, it's awesome, it's amazing."
Same thing. I thought the same as them, like all those comments that they said about your imagery and yeah, it was definitely awesome. I enjoyed the read a lot. It's a very fast read and I feel like adult readers too, because I'm an adult, reading this will really
Right.
enjoy it also because I think as adults we really like all those like readers like the elements of like historical fiction, fantasy, like those are big, popular. It's a popular genre a lot of people are drawn to. But I feel like you don't have to like be all into fantasy either. I feel like if you're someone that really enjoys folklore and mythology and that kind of genre too, you'll really be into this book too. Yeah, it was such a pleasure talking to you about the book today, The Selkie's Daughter, and it's out already. It came out like a couple weeks ago, right?
It came out the January 2nd.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it's been out for a little more than a month now. So
right.
definitely it's available and I encourage everyone to go out and read it. I think it was really great. And I had such a pleasure speaking with you today about it.
This was a great interview. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Thank you for agreeing to join us on Turn the Page today. So we're going to close this chapter of Turn the Page. I am Meghan, children's librarian here at Syosset, and thank you, Linda Crotta Brennan, for being on our podcast today. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.